the chaos of an airport. But that day at JFK, the chaos paused. A young security agent, drunk on a little bit of power, told an old, stooped veteran to leave the line. The old man just looked at him, his eyes clear, and said 2 words. Echo 6. And that's when the world stopped turning. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like it, and comment where you're watching from. Imagine the sounds of JFK International. It's a cathedral of noise, a constant echoing rumble of rolling suitcases, muffled announcements fighting for airtime, and the sharp, anxious chatter of thousands of people going somewhere else. It smells like stale coffee, industrial cleaner, and just a faint, sweet whiff of Cinnabon from 2 terminals over. And in the middle of this river of humanity, in the snaking, endless line for TSA screening, stood Charles. To look at him, you wouldn't look twice. That was, in a way, his whole point. He was perhaps 75, maybe 80. His hair was thin and white, combed neatly but without fuss. He wore simple dark trousers, comfortable shoes, and a slightly too large windbreaker, the kind that might have been stylish in 1995. It was faded, the color hard to name, perhaps olive, perhaps gray. He held a simple canvas carry-on, the zipper strained. He leaned, just slightly, on a simple wooden cane, but it was his hands that told a story. They were knotted with arthritis, the skin thin as paper, but they were steady. He waited with a patience that seemed almost defiant in the frantic energy of the line. People sighed, checked their phones, shifted their weight. Charles just stood, watching, waiting his turn. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a legend. He was just an old man trying to catch the 10:40 a.m. flight to Dulles, probably, as you might guess, to visit a grandchild. He was anonymous. He was exactly what he appeared to be, baggage to be processed. And then there was John. John was the opposite of Charles. He was 26, sharp in his blue TSA uniform, the creases perfect, the badge polished. He stood at the head of the line where the IDs were checked. John didn't like his job, but he liked the sliver of authority it gave him. He saw the line not as people, but as a potential threat queue. Every traveler was a problem to be solved, a box to be checked. He moved with an efficient, impersonal speed. Next, he'd bark, not looking up. Shoes off, laptops out, liquids in the bag. Read the signs. Move along. He had the practiced boredom of someone who has seen it all and is impressed by none of it. He'd been on shift for 6 hours. The caffeine was wearing off, and his supervisor Diaz had just chewed him out for letting the line back up. He was scanning the crowd, and his eyes landed on Charles. He saw the slow movements, the cane, the faded jacket. And John, in that moment, didn't see a person. He saw a delay. He saw a bottleneck. His jaw tightened just a fraction. He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose, and then barked, "Next. Let's go, people, I don't have all day." Charles finally reached the podium. The institutional white light of the checkpoint seemed to wash out what little color he had. He shuffled forward, placing his bag at his feet. "Good morning, son," Charles said, his voice a dry rustle. John didn't look up from his screen. "ID and boarding pass," he snapped. Charles, bless him, fumbled. His knotted fingers struggled with the zipper on his breast pocket. He pulled out an old, worn leather wallet. The line behind him was getting restless. You could hear the sighs, the collective tap-tap-tapping of feet. John looked up, his eyes cold. "Sir, I need you to hurry. You're holding up the line." Charles, flustered, finally produced his driver's license, an old laminated kind, and a paper boarding pass. "Sorry, young man, these fingers, they don't move like they used to." John snatched the documents. He scanned the pass. He looked at the ID. He looked at Charles. Back at the ID. "This picture doesn't look like you." Charles gave a weak smile. "That was taken 10 years ago. Time does its work." John just grunted. "Empty your pockets into the bin. Everything. Take your jacket off. And your belt." He shoved the ID back toward Charles, not waiting for a reply. "Move to the scanner." Charles just nodded, gathering his things, his hand trembling just a little now. It wasn't the tremor of age this time. It was the tremor of being seen as nothing more than a nuisance. Charles did as he was told. He placed his worn jacket in a gray plastic bin. He slid his belt out of his trousers. He fumbled with his shoelaces. They were tie-ups, of course, and John, watching him, actually rolled his eyes. "Sir, if you can't get your shoes off, we'll have to do a secondary screening. Do you want that?" A woman behind Charles, trying to be helpful, said, "Here, Grandpa, let me." But Charles waved her off gently. "I can manage." He finally got the shoes off and placed them, and his wallet, and his keys, into the bin. He pushed it onto the rolling conveyor belt. He then approached the large, intimidating arch of the full-body scanner. He looked at John, who was now directing the person behind him. "Sir," John said, not looking at him, "step in. Hands up." Charles stepped onto the yellow footprints and raised his hands, a posture of surrender he knew all too well, though in a vastly different context. The machine whirred. Beep, 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 a loud, obnoxious alarm. A digital outline of his body appeared on John's screen with a bright yellow box highlighted right over his left chest. John let out an exasperated sigh, loud enough for the first 3 rows of the line to hear. "Of course. Sir, step out. What did you leave in your pocket?" "My pockets are empty," Charles said, his voice quiet but firm. "I checked." John stalked over to him, pointing a finger. "Clearly they are not. You set off the alarm. Did you hear me? Empty your pockets. All of them." He gestured impatiently. "You're holding up the entire airport, old man." The use of old man hung in the air, sharp and disrespectful. Charles paused. He ran his gnarled hands over his shirt. He felt nothing. Then he remembered. Under the shirt, on a thin old chain, was a dog tag, and pinned to his undershirt, something else. "It might be my dog tag," Charles said. "And a pin." John threw his hands up. "A pin? A metal pin? You wore a metal pin through a metal detector? Are you serious?" The line behind them was now openly hostile. People were complaining. "Get him out of here," someone shouted. Charles felt a flush of heat rise in his neck. It's a small pin, son. I forgot it was there. It's important." John scoffed, pulling a wand from his belt. "I'll be the judge of that. Step aside. Now." He gestured to the small, sterile area roped off for secondary screenings. "And take off that chain. You're going to get the full pat-down." This was the moment. The tipping point. Charles was no longer a passenger. He was a problem. He was being herded like an animal into the glass-walled box of shame. "Son, listen to me," Charles started, his voice pleading. "There's no need for this. It's a bronze star. It's just a pin." John stopped. He looked at Charles with genuine disbelief. "A bronze star? You think that nickname makes it not metal? You think I care what you call it? It's a piece of metal, and you failed to declare it." John was enjoying this now. He was making an example of the old man who had slowed down his line. He stepped closer, invading Charles's space. "I've asked you to follow simple instructions, and you failed 3 times. You failed to have your ID ready. You failed to remove your shoes, and you failed to remove your medal. You are non-compliant." Charles stood straight, or as straight as his body would allow. "I am compliant. I am just—" "You are just done," John interrupted, his voice rising, drawing the attention of his supervisor, Diaz, who was watching from her podium. John felt her eyes on him and decided to double down to show his authority. "Sir, I am ordering you to leave the checkpoint. Go back out, get your items sorted, and get back in line. You're not passing through here." He pointed. "Leave." It was the ultimate humiliation. To be sent back past the entire line of staring, judgmental faces, to be dismissed. The noise of the terminal seemed to fade. The clack-clack of the bins, the muffled announcements, the angry sighs. It all went quiet in Charles's head. He looked at John. He didn't see a young man in a uniform anymore. He saw a symptom. He saw a world that had forgotten what sacrifice looked like, a world that mistook patience for weakness and age for irrelevance. He had been through jungles that smelled of rot and fear. He had held dying men in his arms. He had been quiet for 50 years, but there is a limit to silence. Charles's shoulders, which had been stooped with age and humility, seemed to straighten. The tremor in his hand vanished. He did not raise his voice. He did not get angry. He simply changed. The air around him thickened. He looked past John, making eye contact with the supervisor, Agent Diaz, who was now walking toward them, a frown on her face. "What's the holdup, John?" she asked. John turned. "This passenger is non-compliant, ma'am. He failed the scanner and refuses to—" Charles spoke. His voice was not the dry rustle from before. It was low, resonant, and clear. It cut through the air like a honed blade. "I am not non-compliant," John scoffed. "Sir, I told you to leave." "And I," Charles interrupted, his eyes locked on Diaz, "am invoking protocol override." Diaz stopped. "Invoke what? Sir, that's not a civilian option." Charles held her gaze. He said the two words he hadn't spoken aloud in decades, the name that had been his shield and his identity in a world of ghosts. "Authorization, Echo 6. If you had dropped a pin, it would have sounded like a bomb." John just looked confused. "Echo what? Sir, you're not making any sense. Are you medically—" But Agent Diaz froze. Her hand, which had been reaching for her radio, stopped mid-air. The color drained from her face. Her eyes, which had been hard with managerial annoyance, widened, first in disbelief, then in dawning, horrifying recognition. Echo 6. It was not a random phrase. It was not the ramblings of a confused old man. To a frontline agent like John, it meant nothing. But to a supervisor like Diaz, who had been through advanced threat assessment briefings, who knew the classified appendices, Echo 6 was a ghost story. It was a call sign from a unit that didn't officially exist, a name tied to operations that were permanently redacted. It was a designation reserved for a handful of men who had operated so far outside the lines that their very existence was a classified secret. It meant, in simple terms, this man is not to be touched. This man is not to be delayed. This man answers to no one below God. Diaz's mouth opened slightly. She looked at Charles, really looked at him. She saw the worn jacket, but now she saw it as camouflage. She saw the cane, and she wondered if it was a weapon. She saw the old eyes, and she realized they weren't clouded by age. They were scanning, assessing. They were the eyes of a professional. John was still talking. "Diaz, I've got this. I'm escorting him out." Diaz moved so fast John barely registered it. She put her hand flat on John's chest, shoving him back a step. Her voice was a low, furious hiss, a sound infinitely more terrifying than his yelling. "John, shut your mouth. Now!" John froze, stunned. "What?" "I said shut up." Diaz turned to Charles. Her entire demeanor had inverted. The authority was gone, replaced by something John had never seen in her, deference. No, it was more than that. It was reverence. She stood at a subtle, almost imperceptible brace, her hands clasped behind her back. "Sir," she said, her voice shaking slightly. My apologies. We had no... the designation wasn't on the manifest." Charles just nodded slowly. "It wouldn't be." John was gaping. "Diaz, what is going on? He's just an old man." Diaz turned her head slowly, her eyes flashing with a cold fire. "Agent John, you are relieved of this post. Go to the break room, now. Do not speak to anyone." John's face went white. "But he, Diaz said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "is Echo 6. Do you understand what that means? Do you have any idea who you were just yelling at?" John looked at Charles, who was now quietly fastening his shoe. The old man hadn't even looked at John. He hadn't acknowledged John's dismissal. He was, John realized with a sickening lurch, simply waiting for the obstacle to be removed. The name meant nothing to John, but Diaz's reaction told him everything. He had just tried to humiliate a living legend. He had tried to order a ghost out of the line. Diaz turned back to Charles, her composure regained but saturated with respect. "Sir, please, this way." She did not point to the secondary screening area. She unclipped the velvet rope that separated the main line from the known crew member lane, an empty channel reserved for pilots and staff. She gestured for him to pass through. "We will retrieve your belongings." "My pin," Charles said simply. "Of course, sir." Diaz personally walked to the conveyor belt, grabbed the gray bin, and brought it to Charles. She picked up the jacket herself. She saw the pin he'd mentioned still affixed to his undershirt, a simple, small bronze star, but next to it, almost invisible, was another, smaller pin. An insignia she didn't recognize, but it made her stomach clench. "Here are your things, sir. We can provide a private room." Charles shook his head. He put his jacket back on. He put his wallet in his pocket. He didn't bother with the belt. "That won't be necessary. I have a flight to catch." He picked up his canvas bag and his cane. John was still standing there, frozen pale. As Charles walked past, John couldn't help himself. He whispered, I didn't know." Charles paused for half a second. He looked at John, not with anger, not with pity. Just looked at him. "That's the point, son," he said, and then he walked on. Diaz escorted him personally through the empty lane, past the scanners, past the X-ray machines. No one asked him to remove a thing. The other agents just watched, silent, sensing the sudden, massive shift in gravity. The humiliation was gone. The disrespect had evaporated. All that was left was the quiet tap-tap-tap of Charles's cane on the polished floor as the old veteran, his dignity restored not by his actions but by his past, walked toward his gate.